and drops in the monster's activity to create the sort of narrative arcs we can build an emergent story around. Things start relatively peaceful, with there just being regular baddies milling around. Then you begin to see the telltale signs of a swarm on the horizon. Why is this? Well, it all comes down to structure. Left 4 Dead's AI director and Deep Rock Swarms react to the player's performance and create peaks and drops in the monster's activity to create the sort of narrative arcs we can build an emergent story around. Things start relatively peaceful, with there just being regular baddies milling around. Then you begin to see the telltale signs of a swarm on the horizon, and before you know it, you're in a pitch battle. Things die down again, and you have to deal with the consequences. This rising, falling structure is particularly sophisticated, but it serves as a narrative foundation that adds context of the environments, random events, and player dynamics that serve as the story's actual substance. Conversely, the other 2 games I mentioned, I found just have this sort of conveyor belt of zombies attacking you all the time, making it difficult to tell a player-led story because there's no distinction between mindlessly chopping and blasting through a textureless sea of zombies in one area and doing the same elsewhere. Without time to explore and take a breather, the big narrative moments just blur into everything else.
Testing from the Unity, it also have a window.
Is as much about creating loves as it is spikes of interesting systemic interaction. Downtime lets us consolidate our focus on the parts of the story we're most interested in, and also provides a point of contrast for when things get nuts. Lethal Company and Concept Warning do this excellently. If the whole game were deadly monster encounters, then they'd just be complete madness. But the fact that both games start with the players being safe and together, before gradually ramping up the threat as people get split up, communication becomes harder, and chaos takes hold, before returning to that safe baseline, is what makes the escalation into horror comedy chaos so compelling. The same principle applies to, say, GTA's Wanted system, where stories naturally escalate into epic chases or doomed final stands against the cops as you commit ever more crimes in the process of escaping, rather than the game just dumping the entire police force on you at once for something as small as ramming your car into a few measly pedestrians. RimWorld also obeys a similar structural conceit behind the scenes, and it's a large part of why the game works so well as a narrative engine. The default settings will push the colony hard with raids and disasters before easing back for a few days, giving you a chance to rest, recover, and plan. Without this downtime, the dramatic peaks of your story wouldn't be anywhere near as interesting, and you wouldn't have time to get used to the characters because they'd be getting chopped to bits by mechanoids constantly, leading to a less well-paced emergent story with characters that you care less about. Unfortunately, giving players a story scaffold to work with and lots of fun and interconnected inspiration for emergent narratives can only get a game so far. If us players aren't motivated to actually put in the work, take on the role of storyteller, and make an emergent narrative for ourselves, then it's never going to happen. And so games also need to encourage us to care about what's happening and to think about our actions in more of a roleplay context. This is why Baldur's Gate 3, for example, gives you an inspiration point and a bit of XP, or just straight up easier difficulty checks, for doing things related to your background or class. If you have an incentive to roleplay as, say, a barbarian, then you're much more likely to make consistent narrative choices, leading to a better story. In short, the best emergent narrative games give players an incentive to create a consistent narrative persona, whether it's a single character, or a colony, or a whole empire, but leave the specifics up to them, and allow the player to embellish these systemic broad strokes into their own personal narrative. Like how the excellent Wildermyth uses events not to tell you what your character's personalities are, but to set up interesting circumstances that let you decide who they are for yourself, which is much more fun. For a bigger picture version of the same ideas, you need only look at Stellaris, where your choice of government and background each provide a few big fun options that help you define your empire, like how my psychic xenophobes get to call everyone heretics, and they get some special options relating to purging inferior species. However, most of the game is left pretty open, giving me space to figure out what sort of thing my bird boys will be most likely to do, which is much more fulfilling than simply being told what a xenophobic or spiritualist empire is allowed to do. In my case, I decided to worship a series of eldritch super beings because the one thing the birds valued more than racism was having an extra-dimensional sugar daddy. These ideas were really pioneered in The Sims, arguably the original emergent narrative game, where particular personality types get unique options and movements that define how they act. But the game is deliberately vague as to the specifics of what they're actually doing, thanks to the evocative but abstract gestures and the iconic made-up language, letting you project your own unique story onto a handful of canned animations. For the inverse of this idea of incentivizing role-playing through expressive but open prompts, you need only look at Bethesda's games, which kind of suck at giving you opportunity to roleplay because they give you too much freedom and not enough encouragement. Bland, generic choices seem like they give you the most scope for injecting your own character, but with nothing to build from, and no way to define your character through their actions, you're left with a blank canvas and nothing to paint with. Ultimately, Getting people to care about role-playing means using narrative and mechanics alike to demonstrate to the players that their choices and their investment in the unfolding story matters. And this is something that's even true in games without emergent narratives that still borrow some of the same principle. The broad plot arcs in, say, the political choose-your-own-adventure game Suzerain were definitely written in advance, but there are so many possible permutations and so many moments where the game calls back to your previous choices that your individual experience and perspective of the story is likely to be completely unique. I rejected this guy's shady backroom corruption deal early on, and the game constantly brought it back up, even once that plot had already played out, coloring all my future interactions with definitely not Elon Musk in a way that had knock-on consequences throughout the game. Equally, my choice to help my wife on her crusade for women's rights made all the right-wing characters hate me, even though most of them weren't directly involved in that storyline. Mass Effect, besides the AAA example, also loved doing this. That game is even more prescriptivist in where the story can go, but it's also really good at tricking you into thinking like your actions have meaningful consequences by calling back to things you've done earlier in the game, or even in previous entries in the series, giving you an emergent perspective on the story and an organic relationship with the world that feels very rewarding, even if it always comes down to which of the shiny buttons you pick at the end. Now, you might think that these games with pre-written stories shouldn't count as emergent at all because an author has shaped the story in advance, but this sort of involvement from the developer is kind of what I've been arguing for the whole time. Emergent narrative cell. Stepping into overindulgent franchise territory. Four characters, tons of monsters, and much bigger bangs. A not uncommon but very risky move that could just cost the film its entire legacy. But before we crank up the volume on A Quiet Place, be sure to hit like and subscribe to the Nostalgic channel. Bye.
جو أنا في البيت. طب ما رنتليش ليه قبل ما تيجي قبل بحب؟ ماشي طيب. آه. إيه ماشي. إيه؟ الله يبارك فيك، أنت سمعت مين اللي قال لك؟ أيلتس أيلتس توفل والآيلتس إنجليزي. أه
ايلتس ده كان ايلتس
أه
ده كان فين؟
فالدراسة هنا اسمها نرمين مش عارف إيه بس.
ايه ده؟ خلاص الايلتس ولا
خدته خلاص. أه أه
في درجة حتة دي؟